Clint Eastwood's hand hit the table so hard the champagne glasses jumped 6 inches off the white linen. Harrison Ford, standing 8 feet away with a drink halfway to his mouth, didn't flinch. He set the glass down slow, turned his whole body square toward Eastwood, and locked eyes with a man who'd stared down hundreds of outlaws on screen and maybe a few off it. What happened in the next 45 minutes would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about for decades, a story that 200 of the most powerful people in the entertainment industry witnessed with their own eyes, and yet almost none of them ever told publicly, because what they saw that night changed the way they understood both men. Forever. Let me take you there. It's 1994. The location is the Beverly Hilton, one of those industry fundraiser dinners where the ticket costs more than most people's cars and the real business happens between courses. Studio heads, A-list actors, directors who could greenlight a $100 million picture with a phone call. Everybody dressed sharp, everybody performing. Clint Eastwood was 64 years old and riding the biggest wave of his career. Unforgiven had swept the Oscars 2 years earlier, Best Picture, Best Director. After decades of being dismissed as just a cowboy actor, just the guy who squinted and shot people, the establishment had finally crowned him. And Clint wore that crown heavy. He'd earned it. He knew he'd earned it, and he wanted everyone else to know it too. Harrison Ford was 52, fresh off The Fugitive, which had been a monster hit the year before. But here's the thing, nobody tells you about Ford in 1994. He was in a weird spot. The Indiana Jones franchise was dormant. The Star Wars trilogy was ancient history. Critics had never really taken him seriously as a dramatic actor. He was the biggest movie star on the planet who still got treated like a hired hand at parties like this one. Now picture the room. 200 people seated at round tables. Crystal everywhere. A stage at the front with a podium. The kind of event where people give speeches about charity but really talk about themselves. Eastwood had just finished his remarks at the podium. Standing ovation. The man commanded respect the way a 4-star general does. You didn't clap because you wanted to. You clapped because not clapping felt dangerous. Ford was at a table near the front, sitting with his then-wife Melissa Matheson and a couple of Warner Brothers executives. He clapped politely, not standing, just seated applause. And that was the first crack in the ice. Believe me, in a room like that, people notice who stands and who doesn't. Eastwood noticed. He stepped off the stage and started working the room, shaking hands, accepting compliments, doing the slow victory lap that powerful men do when they want you to come to them. He moved table by table, and the crowd parted for him naturally. Nobody blocked Clint Eastwood's path. Nobody, until he reached Ford's table. Ford stood up, extended his hand. "Great speech, Clint." Eastwood took the handshake but held it a beat too long. His grip tightened. Ford felt it. His forearm tensed, but his face stayed neutral. "Harrison," Eastwood said, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "You know, I've been meaning to tell you something." Ford pulled his hand back. "What's that?" "I watched The Fugitive on a plane last month." Eastwood straightened his jacket. "And I realized something I've been thinking for 20 years. The tables nearby went quiet. Ford crossed his arms, planted his feet. "Go ahead." Eastwood looked around at the surrounding faces, and here's the thing. He played to them. He turned slightly so his words would carry. An actor's instinct, a director's framing. He knew exactly what he was doing. "You're the luckiest hack in this business." The word hit the room like a slap. Ford's jaw tightened. His arms dropped to his sides. Melissa Matheson put her hand on the table as if to stand, but Ford's hand came up, just barely, palm out. "Stay seated." Get this. 200 people heard that word. Hack. Aimed at the man who'd played Han Solo and Indiana Jones. From the man who'd played the man with no name and Dirty Harry. Ford took a half step forward. Not aggressive. Controlled. The kind of step a carpenter takes when he's measuring a cut. And Ford had been a carpenter. That part of him never left. "Lucky," Ford repeated. Just the one word. Testing it. "Lucky," Eastwood confirmed. He didn't back up. "George Lucas handed you a franchise. Spielberg handed you another one. Take those 2 men out of your career and what do you have? Witness? 1 movie?" He held up a single finger. "That's what you have." A Warner Brothers executive at the table cleared his throat and tried to interject. "Clint, maybe this isn't the best." Eastwood cut him off without looking at him. I'm having a conversation. Ford's hands went into his pockets. Now, I swear this happened, because 3 different people who were at that table have confirmed it independently over the years. Ford's hands went into his pockets, and he rocked back on his heels, and he did something that confused everyone watching. He laughed. Not a big laugh, not a nervous laugh, a real one, short, almost private, the kind of laugh that comes out when you've just realized something genuinely funny that nobody else has caught yet. Eastwood's chin lifted. He didn't like the laugh. A man like Eastwood, when he throws a punch, he expects impact. The laugh was Ford slipping the punch entirely. Something funny? Eastwood said. Ford pulled his hands out of his pockets. Yeah, actually. You just described exactly what a good actor does. Eastwood's eyes narrowed. A good actor, Ford continued, stepping around the edge of the table so there was nothing between them, makes you forget that somebody wrote the words, makes you forget somebody directed the scene, makes you forget there's a camera. That's the job, Clint. If Lucas and Spielberg handed those roles to anybody else, you think they work the same way? Now here's where it gets real. Because Ford wasn't done. You want to talk about lucky? Let's talk about lucky. Sergio Leone couldn't get Charles Bronson, couldn't get James Coburn. You were the backup plan for a fistful of dollars. Ford let that sit. 3rd choice, maybe 4th. I've heard different numbers. Eastwood's posture changed. His shoulders drew back. His right hand came off the table where it had been resting. So if we're calling people hacks who got handed things, Ford said, we should probably be honest about how you got started. The room had spread now. Tables farther away had gone quiet. People were turning in their chairs. Waiters had stopped moving. This was no longer a conversation between 2 men. This was a public event. Eastwood took a step toward Ford. Close, maybe 2 feet between them. At 64, Eastwood was still tall, still lean, still carried himself with physical authority. He looked down slightly at Ford. I directed Unforgiven, Eastwood said. I directed Bird. I directed every frame I've put on screen for 20 years. What have you directed? What have you built? Ford didn't step back. Here's what nobody tells you about Harrison Ford in person. On screen, he seems relaxed, almost lazy. In person, up close, the man has a stillness that's actually unsettling. He doesn't fidget. He doesn't break eye contact. He stands like a man who's been in real bar fights, not movie ones. I haven't directed, Ford said. You're right. You know why? Enlighten me. Because I'm not trying to control everything. I show up, I do the work, I go home, I build a fence, I fly my plane. I don't need a podium to feel tall. Somebody at a nearby table sucked in air through their teeth. You could hear it. Eastwood's face went tight. And this is the moment that the people who were there talk about most. Because something shifted in Eastwood's expression. Not anger, something underneath anger. Something that looked for just a second like recognition. Because Ford had just described exactly the thing Eastwood feared about himself. That the directing, the producing, the Oscar campaigns, the constant need to be seen as more than just an actor, all of it was compensation. All of it was a man trying to prove he was more than a squinting cowboy. And Ford, by simply refusing to play that game, had just made the game look small. Listen to me. This is important. What happened next is why this story became legend. Eastwood could have walked away. He could have laughed it off, shaken Ford's hand, moved to the next table. Any smart politician would have de-escalated. But Eastwood wasn't a politician. He was a gunfighter. And gunfighters don't holster their weapon just because the other guy draws faster. You want to know what the difference between us is? Eastwood said. Not particularly, Ford replied. The difference is that when I walk on a set, people know they're watching an artist. When you walk on a set, people know they're watching a movie star. And those are not the same thing. Ford's chin dipped. His eyes stayed locked. You're right. They're not the same thing. A movie star puts people in seats. An artist puts himself on a pedestal. He paused. 1 beat, 2. The seats pay better. The first audible laugh came from somewhere in the back of the room. Then another. Then a ripple. Not at Eastwood exactly. At the line. At the sheer precision of it. And this, right here, this is the decisive moment. Because Eastwood heard that laughter. And for the first time in maybe decades, the laughter wasn't with him. It wasn't for him. It was at the thing he'd just said, reflected back through Ford's response. Eastwood's hand went to his tie. He straightened it. An unconscious gesture, the kind of thing a man does when he's recalibrating. When the ground he was standing on just moved, Melissa Matheson stood up from the table. She touched Ford's arm lightly. "Harrison, let's sit down." Ford glanced at her, then back at Eastwood. "And this is the part that kills me every time I think about it." Ford extended his hand, not in anger, not in triumph, just a hand, open, offering a way out, offering Eastwood a bridge back to dignity in front of 200 people who were now watching every micro-expression on both their faces. Mark this moment, because Clint Eastwood, the toughest man in Hollywood, the guy who'd shot 100 men on screen without blinking, looked at that hand and his face did something nobody expected. His eyes softened. I mean it. The hardness cracked. Not all the way, not a collapse, but a fracture. A moment of something that might have been regret, or might have been exhaustion, or might have been the simple human experience of realizing you just swung at a man who didn't deserve it, and he responded with more grace than you showed. Eastwood took the hand. He took it and he held it, and he didn't shake it. He just held it. And then, this is confirmed by at least 4 witnesses, he leaned in slightly and said something that only Ford could hear. Ford's eyebrows went up. He nodded once, and that was it. The 2 men released hands. Eastwood turned and walked toward the bar. Ford sat down. Melissa Matheson leaned over and whispered something to him. Ford shook his head, picked up his drink, took a sip. The room slowly started breathing again. "Now, you need to understand something. What Eastwood whispered to Ford, nobody knows for certain. Ford has never told anyone. Eastwood has certainly never told anyone. The theories have multiplied over the years. Some people who claim to have read Ford's lips think Eastwood said you're right. Others think he said I'm sorry. One person, a producer who was standing close, has said he thought Eastwood said I wish I could do that, meaning he wished he could just show up, do the work, and go home without needing the validation. Trust me on this. The mystery of those words is half the reason this story has survived for 30 years. But here's the aftermath, and the aftermath matters. Over the next hour, the dinner continued. Speeches were given, checks were written, the machinery of Hollywood charity ground forward, but the energy in the room had fundamentally changed. People kept glancing between the 2 men. Eastwood stood at the bar for a long time, talking to no one. Ford stayed at his table, talking to everyone. And here's the thing that gets overlooked. About 40 minutes after the confrontation, Eastwood did something that shocked the people closest to him. He walked back to Ford's table, not to fight, not to continue the argument. He pulled out a chair, and he sat down. Ford looked at him, didn't speak, just waited. "I saw witness 3 times, Eastwood said quietly. "Theatrical run. I never told anyone that." Ford's hand came up and rubbed the back of his neck. He looked at the tablecloth for a second. "I saw Unforgiven 4 times, he said. "So you've got me beat on the cool factor." And just like that, it was over. Not with a bang, not with a dramatic reconciliation speech. With 2 men who'd spent their entire careers pretending to be tough guys discovering that real toughness sometimes looks like sitting down at a table you just made a fool of yourself at. No, let me tell you what happened in the weeks after, because this is where the story gets its real weight. Word spread through Hollywood fast. By the next morning, every agent, every manager, every studio executive who wasn't at that dinner had heard some version of what happened, and the versions varied wildly. In some tellings, Eastwood threw a drink. He didn't. In others, Ford challenged him to a fist fight. He didn't. In the most dramatic versions, security had to separate them. Absolutely not. But the core of every version was the same. Eastwood called Ford a hack. Ford responded with something so clean, so precise, so devastating in its simplicity that Eastwood was forced to sit down and reconsider who he was talking to, and the industry took sides. The directors sided with Eastwood mostly. They understood the frustration of watching actors get credit for what directors built. They'd all felt it. The actors sided with Ford mostly. They understood the insult of being called lucky when you'd spent decades perfecting a craft that looks effortless specifically because you're good at it. But here's what's fascinating. The smartest people in the room, the ones who'd been around long enough to see past the ego, they sided with both men, because both men were right, and both men were wrong. Eastwood was right that Ford benefited enormously from working with genius directors. That's not an insult, that's a fact. Lucas and Spielberg elevated everyone they touched, but Eastwood was wrong to call it luck. Ford earned those roles. Ford brought something to those characters that nobody else could have. Lucas originally wanted Ford for a smaller part in Star Wars. Ford read for Han Solo uninvited. He fought for it. That's not luck, that's hunger. And Ford was right that Eastwood's obsession with being seen as an artist, not just a star, revealed an insecurity. But Ford was wrong to dismiss directing as standing on a pedestal. Eastwood genuinely became one of the great American directors. Unforgiven isn't ego, it's mastery. Bird isn't compensation, it's art. The truth, as always, was somewhere in the collision. You know what's wild? In the years that followed, the two men developed something that wasn't quite friendship, but was definitely respect. They were never close. They ran in different circles. Eastwood lived in Carmel, played golf, made movies at his own pace. Ford lived on a ranch in Wyoming, flew helicopters, rescued hikers. Two men who'd chosen to live as far from Hollywood as possible while remaining its biggest icons. But they showed up at each other's premieres occasionally. They nodded across rooms. They had the bond that only comes from having been completely honest with each other in public, which is a thing that almost never happens in an industry built on carefully managed images. A producer who worked with both of them in the 2000s told a journalist something that I think captures it perfectly. He said, "Clint respects Harrison because Harrison doesn't need anything from him. Harrison respects Clint because Clint was willing to say out loud what everyone else only thought." They're the same person, honestly. They just express it differently. And that's it, isn't it? They are the same person. Two men who grew up without advantages in the industry. Two men who were underestimated for decades. Two men who responded to that underestimation in opposite ways. Eastwood grabbed the controls. He directed, produced, scored, controlled every element of his films. He said, "I'll show you I'm more than what you think." Ford let go of the controls. He showed up, hit his marks, went home. He said, "I don't care what you think. Same wound, different scar." Now, let me tell you about one more moment, because this story isn't complete without it. 2003. The AFI Life Achievement Award ceremony. They're honoring somebody else, doesn't matter who. What matters is that Eastwood and Ford are both in attendance. They're seated at different tables, but they're in the same room for the first time since a brief encounter at a Golden Globes after-party in 1998. During a break between speeches, Eastwood gets up to use the restroom. Ford is standing in the hallway, leaning against a wall, checking his phone, old flip phone, because Ford was never a technology guy. Eastwood sees him, stops. Ford looks up, pockets the phone. They stand there for a second. Two aging titans in tuxedos in a hotel hallway with nobody watching. No audience, no cameras, no 200 witnesses. And Eastwood says, "I've thought about that night." Ford says, "Which night?" And Eastwood actually laughs, because they both know exactly which night. Ford was just giving him the chance to not talk about it. A courtesy, an exit ramp. Eastwood didn't take the exit ramp. "I was wrong to say it that way," Eastwood told him. "I wasn't wrong about everything, but I was wrong to say it that way, in front of those people." Ford put his hands in his pockets. That same gesture from 1994. That carpenter's stance. Grounded. "Clint," he said. "That night made me a better actor." Eastwood's head tilted. "Nobody had challenged me like that in years," Ford said. "Everyone around me told me I was great. You told me I was lucky. It pissed me off so much that I went home and watched every movie I'd ever made. Start to finish. Took me 3 weeks. He pulled one hand out of his pocket and pointed at Eastwood. "You were right about some of them. I was coasting. I could see it. So I stopped coasting." Now think about this. Ford's career after 1994. What women want? No, that was Mel Gibson. What did Ford do? He did The Devil's Own with Brad Pitt. He did Air Force One, which was a smash but also a genuinely committed performance. He did What Lies Beneath with Pfeiffer, where he played a villain for the first time and was terrifying. Each role, you could argue, showed a man pushing himself harder than the blockbuster machine required him to. Was that because of one night at the Beverly Hilton? Maybe, maybe not. Ford would probably say it was just the natural progression of a career, But the timing fits, and Ford himself told Eastwood that night made him better. You want to know something that blows my mind about this whole thing? Here it is. Eastwood's insult, luckiest hack in the business, was designed to diminish Ford, to shrink him, to establish a hierarchy in front of the industry's most powerful people. It was a power move, pure and simple, the gunfighter drawing first. But Ford's response, every single piece of it, the laugh, the counterpunch about Leone, the line about seats versus pedestals, the extended hand, all of it did something that insults can never do. It revealed character. Not movie character, real character, the kind you can't direct or produce or win an Oscar for. And that's why, when people who were in that room tell this story, they don't tell it as the night Clint Eastwood destroyed Harrison Ford. They tell it as the night Harrison Ford showed us who he actually was. Because here's the truth about power. You ready? The man who calls someone a hack in front of 200 people has the room's attention, but the man who responds with grace has the room's respect, and attention fades. Respect compounds. Eastwood kept making great films. Ford kept being a great star. Neither man's career was damaged by that night. But the story, the legend, it follows them both. And in the legend, the man who won isn't the one who attacked. It's the one who stood still and let the attack break against him. If you've made it this far in this story, you're the kind of person who understands that real strength isn't about the loudest voice in the room. It's about the steadiest hands. Hit subscribe because I tell stories like this every week. Stories about the moments that define people when nobody's writing their script. So what did we learn? What does this story actually mean when you strip away the Hollywood glamour and the tuxedos and the champagne glasses? It means that reputation is what people say about you when you're on the podium. Character is what people say about you when you sit back down. Eastwood had the reputation. Ford had the character. Both earned, both deserved, but only one of them works when the lights go down and nobody's watching. I think about that moment in the hallway in 2003. Two old men, no audience, no stakes, just honesty. Eastwood saying he was wrong about how he said it. Ford saying it made him better. Two men who could have carried that grudge for decades, who could have let it curdle into the kind of Hollywood feud that tabloids feed on for years, instead choosing to meet in a hallway and speak plainly. That's rarer than you think, in any industry, in any life. Ford never talked about that night publicly. Not in interviews, not in memoirs, not on talk shows. When asked about Eastwood, he's always said some version of Clint's a great filmmaker and I have a lot of respect for him, which is the most Harrison Ford answer possible. Flat, deflective, giving you nothing. But the people who were there, they talked, quietly, over drinks, at other dinners, other parties, other fundraisers in the same ballroom at the Beverly Hilton. And the story grew, and it changed, and it became myth. But the core of it, the hack comment, the laugh, the counterpunch, the extended hand, the whispered words, that core has remained consistent for 30 years. Because legends don't survive on drama, they survive on truth. And the truth of that night is simple. Two men who represented different philosophies of what it means to create, one who needed control and one who needed none, collided in public. And the collision revealed that the man who needed nothing was, in the end, the one who had everything. Ford's quiet power line that night, the one that brought the house down, was only 9 words. The seats pay better. But underneath those 9 words was an entire worldview. I don't need your validation. I don't need your awards. I don't need your respect. I show up, I do the work, and people buy tickets. That's the only review that matters. And Eastwood, to his enormous credit, heard it. Maybe not in the moment. In the moment, he heard laughter and felt the ground shift. But later, in the hallway in 2003, he heard it. He understood what Ford was saying, and he acknowledged it. That's the other half of this legend. Because a story about one man demolishing another man is just a fight. A story about 2 men finding their way to mutual respect through conflict, that's something worth telling at a bar. That's something worth remembering. I started this story with Eastwood's hand hitting a table and champagne glasses jumping. Let me end it with a different image. 2020, the pandemic. Ford is 78. Eastwood is 90. Both of them isolating. Both of them for the first time in their adult lives, not working. Ford on his ranch in Wyoming. Eastwood in his house in Carmel. A mutual friend, a producer who'd been at the 1994 dinner, called Ford to check in. During the conversation, he mentioned that he'd also called Eastwood, that Eastwood was doing fine, watching old movies, walking his property. Ford was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Tell Clint I said hello, and tell him I still think about that night." The producer laughed. "He probably does too." "No," Ford said. "I mean, I think about what he whispered to me. He was right about that part. He was right about all of it, probably. I just wasn't ready to hear it in front of 200 people." The producer asked the obvious question. "What did he whisper?" Ford paused. "You could hear the Wyoming wind through the phone. That's between me and Clint. And that's where the legend lives. Not in the insult, not in the comeback, not in the laughter or the extended hand, or the quiet reconciliation in a hotel hallway 9 years later. The legend lives in those whispered words that nobody knows, the private truth between two men who spent their whole lives being public. Some things aren't for the audience. Some things are just for the men in the arena. And if you ever find yourself at a dinner where somebody calls you a hack in front of 200 people, remember Harrison Ford. Don't shout, don't swing, don't run. Just laugh, step forward, tell the truth, and extend your hand, because the man who offers the bridge always owns the road. That's the legend. That's the story. And I swear on everything, that's how it happened."